5,000 flights just last month, 2 million passengers a year. We're also hearing this from the authority that oversees that airport. They say they are screening cars in addition to passengers that are coming into the airport, and they're trying to get the word out on this huge holiday travel day for passengers to factor in some extra time into their trips. Flights domestically are still arriving and departing there, but the TSA says it's in a heightened state of security posture, something that it has been in due to the situation in Israel. And I spoke to TSA Administrator David Pekoski about this just the other day. He says there are things you may see that are different, things you may not see, and he told me that they always need to be alert. Listen.
We're always looking at the threat. We're always assessing the risks that occur across the entire system, not just here in the United States, but also at last point of departure airports internationally. And so we do things that passengers might not even notice.
So we know that the Buffalo FBI is now taking the lead in this investigation. Talk to us about what they're assessing at this moment, and how does an investigation like this even begin?
Sure, Bianna. So of course it starts at the scene, right? You have all sorts of tactical assets and SA bomb technicians that respond to the scene in order to render it safe. They want to make sure that there's not actually an explosive device or another device there that could hurt any of the first responders. Once they do that, we bring in the evidence response teams, and they know how to basically disassemble everything that's taken place there, document what we have for evidence, and really maximize the significance of the investigation of that stuff on site. At the same time, you have teams of analysts and other agents who are working back in the Buffalo field office, and they are trying to exploit every piece of information that we can get from this vehicle. So we know who the vehicle was registered to. We try to identify those people, to identify their family members and associates. And then we have agents out in the field contacting those individuals to try to help us identify who was in this car and what might have motivated them, what they might have been doing that day, what might have led to this either horrible accident or intentional act that could have caused loss of life and a lot of damage. And then of course there's a very robust exchange going on with our Canadian colleagues. We work very closely with Canadian law enforcement and intelligence, and I'm sure that they are shoulder to shoulder with our FBI folks working through these issues.
Yeah, we were taking a
Sure. So the acceleration, when we learned about the acceleration, that was really the first thing to me that jumped out against the theory that this might have been sort of an intentional detonation of an explosive device. It's not consistent with the way terrorists or operatives work. If you had a vehicle that was rigged up to explode, you wouldn't draw that sort of attention. You wouldn't have to attack the place before you detonated the device. So those two things didn't seem to me to be consistent. It certainly still looks like an intentional act, but it could have been one. It could have been a mistake, because now that we know that they were on a separate road and actually landed where they did because they crossed the barrier in air, that introduces all sorts of questions as to exactly where was this vehicle going, what were they trying to accomplish before they ended up on fire and upside down on the border. So I think it's, as we've gotten deeper and been able to put more facts around what's happened, I think that the question of why, what was the motivation and the intent here, has gotten muddier. Absolutely. I think some of those initial responders would be special agent bomb technicians. They have the technology and the devices and robots and all sorts of ways to conduct that search for explosive trace residue without putting people in jeopardy. I'm sure that's probably already happened by now.
Plans just in case they're unable to actually return home.
I'm actually from the U.S., so we came over here hoping to see the falls just for the day. We walked over. Our car's actually in New York right now.
If I now open soon, I'll probably get the place to sleep over here. So if I can't go home,
we're not.
Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to last.
White House Press Secretary, meanwhile, Karine Jean-Pierre, says U.S. President Joe Biden has been briefed on the vehicle explosion at the Rainbow Bridge port of entry, and that he and his team are closely following developments. Meanwhile, Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkew has released a statement reading, "The service regularly works with national and provincial law enforcement to ensure coordination and information sharing. Lines of communication between law enforcement agencies are open and active." And an official with the Niagara Falls Memorial Medical Center confirms there are fatalities in today's explosion on the Rainbow Bridge. CP24's Kayla Williams joins us live with the details on that. And Kayla, as officials really try to differentiate between what might have happened here, the possibilities seem still to be endless at this point, but we do know a little bit more about those fatalities.
Yeah, exactly. We do know, we can confirm that the two people that have been confirmed dead were inside the vehicle that exploded at the Rainbow Bridge earlier this afternoon. We're showing you live pictures now from the Niagara side of the border. The CP24 Steve Ryan is there and has been giving us a point of view perspective from the grounds there. But as far as the intentionality behind this explosion, we still don't have that answer, Lindsay. Whether or not this was intentional or not, perhaps it was a medical emergency. We're still waiting to hear from officials that are piecing together all of the facts and information about this situation to provide to the public. But what we can tell you is that according to the emergency management services at Niagara Falls Memorial Medical Center, there was also one individual who suffered non-life-threatening injuries that was brought into the hospital this morning after the explosion. So that is something that we're learning. Whether or not there are other people who were injured in this explosion, because when you take a look at the pictures, this was quite the scene here. The damage is no doubt extensive right at the Canada-US border. I also want to note too that the explosion happened on the US side of the border. And now, hours later, we're learning the ripple effect of it. 4 bridges have now been closed that access southern Ontario to New York at the US-Canada border. Those bridges include the Rainbow Bridge, where this incident happened itself, as well as Whirlpool Bridge, Lewiston-Queenston Bridge, as well as Peace Bridge. And now we're also learning that the Buffalo Airport has closed its international section. All flights have been shut as far as coming and going following this explosion at the US border. So that is out of abundance of caution following this incident. But of course, we're still hearing that, according to us, could have been an accident, that this was not intentional whatsoever. But of course, out of an abundance of caution, they are still operating under the assumption that this incident is terror related. And at this time, meetings are happening in real time to determine if this was in fact an isolated incident. So of course, a very fluid situation. We know that according to Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc, he says that Canada is taking this very seriously. There's no doubt that officials on both sides of the border have been in constant communication. They are helping each other in this joint effort to piece together just what exactly took place leading up to the explosion. Of course, we know that the vehicle coming from the Canada side when the explosion happened at the Canada-US border. But of course, what we do know, the location of it, the amount of cameras is quite vast. So there's no doubt that that is a big piece to this investigation with officials. So we will continue to bring you the very latest. We're also expecting to hear from the Buffalo Mayor, Byron Brown, at some point on the explosion. This is a live look from the US side. As you can see, still a very heavy police presence involved now into the late afternoon hours. The road closures still in effect, the bridge closures still in effect, with no estimated timeline as to when they could potentially be reopened. And of course, the timing of this too is also to be worth noting, considering tomorrow marks the start of the American Thanksgiving long weekend, tomorrow marking Thanksgiving itself for Americans. So those who typically go and cross on both sides of the border around this time of year, this is known to be a very popular time of year when people will be crossing. That won't be a possibility, at least for today, and we don't have an exact timeline as to when the bridges will possibly be reopened. Lindsay.
Yeah, such